On one night in 1983, the world almost ended. Not with an explosion, but with a phone call. A Soviet officer had less than 5 minutes to decide if nuclear war had begun. The system said, "Missiles are coming." Protocol said, "Report it immediately." If he was wrong, hundreds of millions would die. But he hesitated. And that hesitation may be the only reason you're alive today. This is the moment the world came closest to ending, and the man who stopped it.
Let's break down the 5 minutes that nearly ended the world.
Think about the worst day of your life. Now imagine that on that day, you had to make a decision in less than 23 minutes. And if you got it wrong, hundreds of millions of people were going to die. That is not a movie. That actually happened. On September 26, 1983, one man sat in a bunker outside Moscow, staring at a screen that was telling him nuclear missiles were on their way to the Soviet Union. His name was Stanislav Petrov. To understand what Petrov was dealing with, you have to understand just how bad things were in 1983. The Cold War had been going on for decades. America on one side, the Soviet Union on the other,
requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
And by 1983, the tension had hit a point where both sides were genuinely scared of each other. In March of that year, US President Ronald Reagan stood up in front of a crowd and called the Soviet Union an evil empire.
Impulses of an evil empire to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding.
Not in a private meeting, in public, on television. The Soviets were furious. Then, in early September, a Soviet fighter jet shot down a passenger plane, Korean Airlines Flight 007. 269 people on board, including a US congressman. The whole world was horrified. Reagan then announced a new missile defense system in space. People called it Star Wars. The Soviets read it as preparation for war. Both sides had thousands of nuclear weapons aimed at each other at all times. Scientists at the time estimated that a full nuclear exchange between the US and USSR could kill up to 1 billion people in the months that followed. Not just from the bombs, but from the cold and darkness that would follow after. This was the world Stanislav Petrov was living in. Petrov was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. He was 44 years old in 1983. He was not famous. He was not powerful. He was just a man doing his job. He worked at a place called Serpukhov 15, a secret bunker about 100 kilometers south of Moscow. His job was to monitor a satellite system called Oko, which means eye in Russian. The whole point of Oko was simple. If the United States launched nuclear missiles toward the Soviet Union, Oko would see them first. On the night of September 26th, Petrov was working the late shift. His usual shift commander was sick. Just past midnight, the alarms went off. The screen in front of Petrov lit up. One missile. Launched from the United States, the system jumped to its highest alert level. This wasn't a soft warning. It was screaming. Then a second missile appeared on screen. Then a third. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. 5 nuclear missiles, according to the system, were now on their way to the Soviet Union. The protocol was completely clear. Petrov's job was to verify and report. If the system flagged an incoming attack, he was supposed to get on the phone to his superiors immediately. They would tell the Soviet leadership, and the Soviet leadership, following their own protocol, would launch a counterattack before the incoming missiles could land. That was the chain. That was the plan. And Petrov had minutes to follow it. He looked at the screen. Something didn't feel right. Here is what went through Petrov's mind. First thought, if the Americans were starting a nuclear war, why would they only send 5 missiles? When you launch a first strike, you launch everything. Hundreds, maybe thousands of warheads, all at once, so the other side can't respond. 5 missiles didn't make sense as a serious attack. 5 missiles felt like a mistake. Second, The Oko satellite system was brand new. It had only been in operation for a short time and had not been fully tested in all conditions. Petrov knew the system was not perfect. His gut told him it could be lying. Third, the ground radar, a completely separate tracking system, was not picking up anything. Ground radar was slower, but it was supposed to confirm what the satellites detected. It was showing nothing. Petrov made the call. He picked up the phone to his superiors and reported it as a false alarm. He had no proof, no confirmation from any other source, no guarantee. He just believed, based on logic and on instinct, that the system was wrong. He was right. The missiles were not real. A rare alignment between the satellite sensors and sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds had tricked the system into seeing something that wasn't there. Because of a strange natural accident in the atmosphere, the system panicked. And if Petrov had followed the rules, if he had followed his training, the Soviets might have launched before anyone could figure out it was a mistake. Take a moment to think about what the other version of this night looks like. Petrov reports the attack as real. His superiors believe him. They call the Kremlin. In minutes, because they have very few minutes before impact, a decision is made to launch. Thousands of Soviet nuclear missiles fly toward the United States. America detects the launch and fires back, and within hours, most of the world's major cities no longer exist. Petrov was not dramatic about it when he talked about it in interviews later. He just said, "I was at the right place at the right time." But that undersells it massively. He was the one who chose to stop. And stopping, when everything around you is screaming that you should act, is one of the hardest things a human being can do. You might think Petrov became a hero after this. A medal, a promotion, a national ceremony. None of that happened. Instead, there was a quiet investigation. His superiors were not impressed that he had gone against the protocol. He was supposed to report. He didn't. Technically, he had broken the rules. There was no punishment, but there was no praise either. He was moved to a less important position. He retired early. He went home. The whole incident was classified. Nobody knew. Not in the Soviet Union, not anywhere in the world. It was just a file in a government archive. The story started coming out in the early 1990s after the Soviet Union fell apart. Slowly, piece by piece, Western journalists and researchers started putting it together. When they finally tracked Petrov down and sat with him, in 2006, he was honored at a quiet ceremony at the United Nations in New York. In 2013, he received the Dresden Peace Prize. A documentary was made about him called "The Man Who Saved the World." He accepted all of it with a shrug. He didn't see himself as a hero. He said he just did what seemed logical in the moment. And honestly, that might be the most unsettling part of this entire story. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017. He was 77 years old. Here's the thing that stays with me about Petrov. He had every reason to follow the rules. The rules were built by smart people for good reasons. His entire training, his career, his sense of duty, all of it pointed toward one action: report the attack. But he stopped. He thought. He used his own brain when the machines and the protocols and the entire system built around him were all saying, "Act now." And that's the truth this story leaves you with. The systems we build, no matter how expensive, how advanced, how carefully designed, are not perfect. And sometimes the most important thing in the world is having one human being with the courage to say, "Wait, something doesn't feel right here." That man was Stanislav Petrov. And because he was there that night, because he was calm enough to think when everything else was screaming, "You are here,"